Hey guys, so today we are looking at the solo tone from the Beatles song Nowhere Man off the album Rubber Soul. Now this tone, if you've heard it, as many of you would, is an extremely bright, compressed sound, unlike a lot of the rest of the album, and it has this really distinct quality to it. So what we're going to do today is use exclusively Slate Everything Bundle plugins. This includes S-Gear, which is not a product made by Slate, but is part of the bundle. So we're using that as the amp. So I use a Telecaster for this. The actual song, I think, is 2 Stratocasters, as both George and John were given Stratocasters, I think, in 1964. Either given or they went and bought them. But they had 2 Stratocasters, and this kind of marked the change from the Rickenbacker Vox thing. So I'll play you the track, and then we'll go through how I recreated the sound. So I'm just going to solo the first guitar. I probably should have named these rather than have them just audio files, but anyway. So this is the first guitar. So what we'll do is I'll first talk about what I'm trying to achieve with these plugins and a bit about how the Beatles actually got this tone. So as far as amps I used at that time, I'm not 100% sure what was used on this specific song. I know that in the studio they had a Fender Bassman and still had the Vox AC100s they were using on Rubber Soul, but there also might have been a Fender Deluxe or a Fender Twin or a Fender Super, depending on what time. They seem to use a lot of different Fender amps after the kind of Vox period, even though live they had to use Voxes because of their contractual obligations. So what I'm doing for the first thing, which is the amp, is using S-Gear. Now, because to me it's in between that sound, I'm using the Wayfarer, which is kind of the Fender Blackface type model. It does a lot more things, can kind of get Mesa tones as well. But that's my starting point on the clean channel, with the EQ set close to the middle, just a bit less treble and fairly clean. For the cab, I'm using the inbuilt cabs. Now, I do have plenty of impulses I could have used, but as I wanted to keep in the Slate stuff, I decided it'd be better just to use what is here. Now, I did try some more Fender-y stuff like the Classics Ceramic and the Californian Combo, but just didn't really like how it sounded. So we are using the British Blues. So this is an AC30 cab with British Blue speakers. So I've got the 2 different cabs here. We're using 121 and a 160 ribbon. The other option would be the SM57, but I think it would have been either condensers or ribbons used on this. And that's it. That's that on. So what we'll do is I'll mute everything else. And so we'll hear what it sounds like just with the amp. First, this is just my dry DI sound. Just going to loop it all. I didn't really nail that harmonic at the end. I probably should have used one from another take, but other than that, that gets us pretty close. I definitely still prefer using real valve amps, even through impulses. We've come a long way with digital modeling, but it's just not quite there yet. But you can hear it gets a kind of good tone. There's just a few little digital overtones in there that come out a bit once we start adding stuff. But definitely if you replace that amp with an actual amp, maybe like a Fender Super or an AC30 or something, it might get just a bit sweeter and a bit nicer kind of compression. So the Beatles were famous for using compression. Now they had two main compressors they used, and that is the Fairchild 660 and modified Altec compressors. Now I'm not sure if they either used the Fairchild or the Altec compressors on this track. They very much could have used the Altecs. Slate doesn't have any emulations of the Altecs, and I'm not exactly sure how to get that sound. So what I went for is more of the Fairchild thing. So this is where I have the VBC FG Mu, sorry. So this is sort of based on the Fairchild. It is not meant to be an exact recreation, but it's that kind of thing. So what are we doing to get the super compressed sound? Is I'm using two of them. They're both set very similar, a bit more gain and a bit less compression threshold to make up for the gain here on the first one and then the second one. So I'm going to play it on loop again. We'll add in each of them. Now, the important thing is the next section, the mix rack, I've actually wedged between these. I found that was the best tone. I did try the mix rack first, feeding both of them. But what it means is this one kind of gets the amp tone, and then the EQ'd and console-y tone from the mix rack feeds this second one. Now, I don't think that's how they would have done it. I'm not sure how they would have done it. They might have gone through one channel in and through another channel. I'm not sure. We'll start talking about what they did with channel EQ after we go through this. But first, this is the compression. As you can hear, the second compressor adds a lot more sustain and swelling to the notes. So yeah, that's the two compressors. Now, if you wanted to do this live, there was plenty of compression kettles that can get this kind of thing, and there is a few that do have two compressor circuits back to back in them. So yeah, do your research, but I think something like a Dynacop can definitely get this pushing, punchy compression. So next, let's look at the mix rack. Now, as you can see, I've got a hell of a lot of plugins in. So I mentioned before what they did with the console. So basically, when they were recording, they decided they wanted heaps of treble. Now, back in the 60s, everything was valves and tape. Now, the thing with tape is it does knock down a lot of high end, especially older tape from the 50s and 60s. By the 70s, tape was a lot more hi-fi. The Ampex machines were more hi-fi, and you could get more headroom, more high-end, all that. In the 60s, with all the tube gear, not so much. So what you had to do is generally push a lot of treble in them. One, to get over the noise floor, and two, to get this brightness. Now, this is one of the things that the Beatles kind of pushed the envelope with. So what they did is they sent it through one channel of the console, as you would with a guitar, boosted the treble all the way up. And after that, they decided that was not enough treble, so they fed that channel back into another channel on the desk and did the same thing again. Now, because we're working in a modern digital environment, we don't have a lot of that high-end loss. I have boosted the treble here. I've boosted it around 2K and around 4K, but I haven't had to do 20 dB, 30 dB like the Beatles did, because that would just sound ridiculously harsh. So that's kind of what these two EQs are doing. Next, we kind of have the FG76. Now, this is sort of a loose emulation on the V76 Telefunk and Preamp. Now, these are kind of similar to the preamps that were in Abbey Road at the time. So I'm using that to kind of get a bit of that preamp mojo that you would get from those old consoles. And then with the virtual channel, I'm using the RC tube just to get the same thing, the channel thing you get from a tube console. Now, none of these are emulations of the Beatles gear. I'm just using them to kind of get that vibe. Something like the Waves Red is an emulation of that console and probably would get you much closer. I may look into redoing this video but with Waves plugins and see what we can come up with. So that's basically all of that, and I did use the trimmer for a bit of gain staging, but as you can see, it's only -1. It was -3 before, but I fixed the gain staging up a bit. So we'll do the same thing as before, and I'm just going to play it and then add in this EQ. Okay, so you can hear it adds a bit of top end, kind of makes it sit together a bit more and a bit chimier. And that's the key thing. Now, the last thing I did is I did add a little bit of this room reverb in Verbsuite Classics, just because I found it a little dry. They might have used room mics in there. They might have mic'd the cabs a lot further back than the options I had in S-Gear. Which I actually mic quite close because I didn't like the phasing sound that was going on mic further back. There was just a weird tone in there I didn't like. But yeah, they might have used a room mic, they might have done all these things that gave it a little bit more air. There doesn't seem to be a lot of reverb on Rubber Soul. It's a pretty dry album. But yeah, I wanted to get a little bit of room sound, so just added that. It's extremely subtle. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you listen to the actual song, it'll sound like there's almost a 12-string thing going on. And partly that's because of all the compression, but another factor is supposedly they both, John and George, played the part exactly the same over top of each other. Now, maybe John actually played both parts or George played both parts. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's pretty much a double-tracked solo. So what I've done is double-tracked it here with another track there, which I've frozen, and it has the same settings and stuff. So I'll show you with that, and then we'll add that in and kind of complete the picture. Now, the thing you can do with double track guitars like this is do some interesting panning things. Now, Rubber Soul is possibly my favourite Beatles album, but it suffers from one thing in the stereo version, which was crazy, lazy 60s panning. So you have drums on one side, vocals all over the place, guitars all on one side. In a modern mix, you might want to go a little bit more, conservative, everything close together, or you could go the kind of thing that was big in like pop punk and a few other things, which is the left, center, right mix. So what I'm going to do is just put these up in the middle, both the same volume. And what we'll do is basically have it with the drums and the bass. I'll show you in the middle, and then we're going to go hard left and right and just get a really wide chimey sound. So what you can hear is obviously it's a lot wider. It doesn't have that center kind of midness, but it, works for a cool wide thing. And of course, you don't just have to use this to play covers of Nowhere Man. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. It is actually a really cool tone. It's really insane. It kind of doesn't respond to your dynamics as you expect, but for chimey stuff, this is really cool, especially if you're going for that 60s vibe. Also to note, I did add some of the same Fairchild compression to the drums and to the bass. The actual bass on the original song would be Paul's Hofner, which I think was just DI'd and then EQ'd on the desk and compressed with probably the Fairchild or probably maybe the Altex. But I don't have a Hofner, so I just used a jazz bass copy and rolled down the low end and then EQ'd it a bit. So if you go to Virtual Mix Rack, I just took out some of that 4K that is your nice clarity in a jazz bass and boosted 400 and 200 to try and get that more MIDI sounding Hofner thing. Cool, so thanks for watching. If you want more tutorials like this and have any suggestions for getting either classic guitar tones or any other specific tone, just put it in the comments section and I'll have a look at recreating it either with Slate stuff or with free plugins or whatever anyone can suggest. I might give it a go. I will be doing some more stuff with free plugins and showing how to get tones with either on a budget or with free plugins, because, not everyone can afford all this classic gear they use. I mean, Fairchilds cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, so of course you're not going to be able to recreate it with actual Fairchilds. So yeah, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content, either guitar content or more just audio production stuff. Thank you, and have a good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. Enjoy.